Yes, yes. Thank you. Yes. Okay. If we're speaking about how the plans of ransomware, I mean, from the recent years, the increments is rapid. So, may I speak in Indonesia also? Okay. Saya mungkin tadi yang ditanya Slide Inggris adalah seberapa impact dan trennya sih sebenarnya ransomware itu di Indonesia. So, kalau kita bicara bahwa trennya luar biasa sekali. Kalau kita lihat tadi mungkin ada Mas Obrian tadi presentasi tentang IoT dan BSSN juga melakukan pemantauan gitu ya. Tahun lalu kita punya sekitar 2,7 juta attack dari ransomware. We have 2.7 million attack of ransomware to Asia, I mean Southeast Asia. So yeah, half of them, like 1.3 million is from Indonesia. So Indonesia is a victim for 1.3 attack of ransomware. So from this number, we see that if we see the recent year, I mean the start of this 2022, we have kita juga punya mungkin kejadian 2 tahun setahun ini ya, awal tahun itu ada satu lembaga negara yang sangat krusial sekali gitu ya di sektor finansial, itu juga terkena ransomware kalau kita bicara berita. So we have the Indonesian one of the regulatory have the attack to ransomware, and then if we talking about the 2017. The first time by the ransomware WannaCry, there's 2 big hospital in Indonesia have to settle their service because of the ransomware. So I think this is very massive attack. So we have to get ready for this new phenomena. So we have to think that there's organization somewhat that take advantage by giving us suffer victims. Thank you.
Great. So we understand the trends now. I think all the attacks we see today, all the new attacks, they're not actually new. They just take a long time, right? But maybe now the frequency of these attacks have gone high. Same like ransomware. I think it started in the 1960s. But talking the context today, what are the common attack patterns observed in external cyber threat landscape?
It always starts with phishing, and before phishing, it was mostly, the first impression mostly you got is with WannaCry. So WannaCry was a workable ransomware that just used a Windows vulnerability that basically caused the SMB to be exploited and then push ransomware. So that seems to be all patched and managed, and because of that, they basically moved around, and now they focus on phishing first. So that's if you ask me, how do they get in? Phishing is the number one thing. Now, it is more nuanced as you get more details in the threat modeling, specifically the attacker-centric threat modeling, where you get into an abstraction layer where you say, oh, there's actually attackers that are doing exploitation directly against your web server, or they try to get in any other form of server you have, or something that's publicly exposed. They get into that server and try to do lateral movement into the heart of your network, which is your Active Directory. Because once they get there, they can push it out in the rest of the network. So that's the general attack pattern. Now there's other avenues as well, like getting on the dark net, getting an info stealer, use that as an entry into the network, used on leaked username and passwords, which is very prevalent in last year in Indonesia. You can go on the dark net and buy a username and password or a credential or access to a company that is sold by another threat actor. So there's a lot of avenues nowadays that are taken to get to the same entry point, which is the execution of ransomware. So that would be my general assessment of that.
Right, thanks, Julian. See, I think we struggle to identify our critical businesses. So we don't know what to protect, right? So we need to talk about how we can identify these businesses, perhaps how we can protect these, right? So my next question is for Pak Edwin. So what are the challenges in protecting the critical business aspects from ransomware?
Okay, thank you. I try to answer this question combined English and Bahasa. So our problem here, or maybe in my company, is because culture or security awareness is still, maybe so. So our main program in internal one side is to, let's say, enroll some technique from very basic security awareness to very advanced one. In other side, we make a data classification rule, so we know which data that should be only in internal side and which data that can be used in external application. So katakan kami di Telkom itu isinya adalah karena kami perusahaan yang punya customer data pelanggan ya. Sementara data pelanggan ini juga kadang digunakan untuk customer experience ketika kami harus kontak mereka dan sebagainya. Mungkin belum lama dengar juga ya yang isu tentang data salah satu layanan kami. Nah, salah satu caranya adalah dengan membuat training awareness di internal Telkom agar pegawai itu tahu mana data-data yang bisa diekspos dan mana yang tidak. Nah, di sisi lain ada peraturan tentang klasifikasi data sehingga treatment terhadap data-data tadi dilakukan sesuai dengan model datanya. And so the third one is implement monitoring and also the special team that respond when some internal incident may appear and also report it to this task force. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Pak. I think from the key points, I think basics is culture. And that's why it's missing in many organizations. That's a security culture. Now we want to build new products, but we ignore security. I think we have to keep security in mind. Good point. Thank you. So we know what's ransomware. We know what are the trends. We know perhaps we have to identify critical systems. Now, what should be the mitigation strategy of an organization to protect themselves from ransomware attacks? Right? Controls required perhaps from preventive and detective perspective and response perspective. So I know this is quite a broad question. Their experience, please help us.
Okay, so basically before we go with the mitigation, we start with the preventive active action first. What we should do. The first thing that we need to do is basically to utilize the best practice. Meaning, one of them is this: we should have educate our people, educate our employees with a cybersecurity awareness and training program. The second thing is we should have a good backup, a regular backup. Nowadays, backup you don't have to use a USB drive. You can use a cloud-based backup. Right? Even our mobile is using now either Google Drive or iCloud. Right? The third is we need to ensure in our organization, our company is security patching must be updated. That is the most important thing in our organization. The other thing is that for certain account, right, or even user account, we need to ensure that multiple factor, the authentication must be applied. That is very important. So we know that we are not, if somebody is trying to steal our account, we get notified immediately, so we can try to avoid that. The mitigation, that for example, based on my experience in the company, right? So we had a attack by the ransomware a few months ago. Okay. So what we did first is actually we unplugged all the anything that we know that, okay, for example, that is infected by the ransomware, unplugged from the network. We want to stop the distribution of the ransomware immediately, and then keep it on. Okay. Then if you have a backup, we're going to use it at all. Okay. Then we check. We need to check what actually the ransomware that hitting our organization or our infrastructure. Okay. Then if let's say we can't say anything, then check on the website if there's any escape at first. Then looking for the help. Last but not least, if you have a good backup, just swap it out and return with the good backup that we have. So that will be my answer.
Right, I think that again touches the basics, right? Talking about defense in depth, how different layers of technology can be protected from ransomware. Plus, I think the key point you touched is education, which again gels with the culture, so we get the basics right. So we have so many security models in place, let's say NIST, FISMA, FINMA, we have regulations in place, but still we see these attacks are happening. Again, ransomware are happening. So we have protection, we have literally defense in there, sort of buzzwords like zero trust. So we are following that. Still, the attacks happen, right? So I think my question is next to perhaps all of you. We're going one by one. So what is the role of government, private sector, and research institutions in protecting organizations from ransomware? We're starting with you, Ruben.
So the problem currently, what I observe as a head of CTI, is that I need, in the situation in Indonesia where a breach happens or some form of ransomware incident, the first thing I need is IOCs. Give me IOCs, and ideally directly from the victim. Extremely hard to get. It's all about who knows who, and sometimes they don't want to disclose because that you're admitting that you have been breached, and because of that, it's very hard to do intelligence sharing among the community. And my idea was, okay, let's bring everybody together and do it together. But it's very hard when, mostly when the government is helping with that people don't want to report in a channel where the government is present, because they are obligated to report any form of impact or incident to other government entities that might be part, or they are part of the oversight and regulated entities, which increases risk in terms of a risk and compliance point of view, which doesn't stimulate the sharing of intelligence. So I really call hard for a non-profit entity that's neutral, not government aligned, that facilitates intelligence sharing in Indonesia. So that will be probably my point.
Sharing data, getting to know what's happening, how it's happening. Okay. Great. What's your take on this, Pak?
Okay. From my perspective, if we're talking about cyber attacks, cyber crimes, we have to think that we are just one ecosystem between the governments, between the private sector, between the research center and something like that. Okay. So the first one is that how we see from the standpoint of the government. So from my side, government is an institution to protect and to serve citizens and also the private sector. So the first one is that governments provide the education system and awareness to the citizen, to the private sector, say that okay, this is dangers of the ransomware. What subject to reason now? And then second, the other thing is that governments provide the extensive mitigation, and the others is that to give the citizens protection. And the other thing is for the law enforcement. We know that nowadays in Indonesia, sekarang kalau kita lihat di Indonesia bahwa orang nggak akan peduli kalau itu nggak ada ruginya secara finansial. Jadi kalau if we talking from the perspective now, cybercrime will be arise very big issue if there's something that impact to the financial. But now we never thinking about if someone is creating a malware, someone is creating ransomware, how we can punish this group of people. Bahwa investmentnya rendah banget karena kita menganggap bahwa ransomware itu ya orang yang cuma iseng dan melakukan kejahatan gitu. Tapi sebenarnya itulah bahayanya bahwa orang ini bisa mengakibatkan yang seperti kita udah cerita, rumah sakit itu bisa nggak jalan gitu pada saat data pasiennya itu lagi keblok. So hospital cannot running and suspended because of patient data is attacked with the ransomware. Okay. The other thing is the private sector. Private sector is the pillar. We know that they have the more awareness, more technology to protect from ransomware. So the private sector doing the mitigation from the side of the people, process, and technology. They have the capability on this. The last one is research center. I think research center we can collaborate with the more research center from the educational, like the university or the private. I mean the freelance cybersecurity analyst and others. So we create an ecosystem where we can protect our common responsibility. That's freelance.
Very comprehensive. Thank you very much. Kendra, what's your take? What should we do?
Well, I would talk about from the private sector, which is what I'm working on. So basically, we need to keep improving our own infrastructure. We need to have some investment on that, and we need to keep reviewing because we never know whether the solution that we have today, okay, is actually still sufficient to prevent the project from getting ransomware attack. Right? So that's what we are doing. We keep doing some improvement. We do some, having a discussion with certain parties. Then from there, we know that okay, what needs to be improved on our side. That's how we can protect that one. Second is that we need to ensure that also, if let's say if any issues or we hear of something that, for example, attack by the ransomware, then we need to ensure that we also inform other parties to let them know, okay, we have a situation, and then what will be the mitigation, and then this is the report, and how much damage that we caused. So like a government, like here is BSSN, they will understand, they will know that, okay, there's some information here, that we can work together, just like said. So we can work together to pass on.
Collaboration is the key. Yeah. So before my next question, I think I'll start with a small story. Right? So a company was attacked using ransomware, and obviously they were brave. What to do? They didn't know what to do. They had a good CTI head, just like Jürgen, who had somebody else who was a good malware reverse engineer. He tried a password, and data was unencrypted. They came out of the attack. He used a default password, which is normally given to people who buy ransomware as service. Right? So the attacker did not change the password. Just had the same password. So I think on those lines, coming to Park Edmund. So what is ransomware as service? Right? Before people have to write their own malwares, right? Now they can just go and buy, and they're quite cheap. Right? So what is ransomware as service, and how is changing the threat landscape, not just in Indonesia overall?
Okay, so actually when I heard this idea the first time, it is very interesting because maybe we familiar with platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, but this thing is about security attack that changed to be kind of service. So with this one, in this service, change the landscape, the threat landscape, especially for the ransomware things, because someone who has extra money, they can pay to someone or things that provide this service. Currently, we can find this service spread up in the what we call it, dark web. Also proposed in some specific forum. So it's means that currently the teams or the person who have ability to do ransomware attack, they over to someone can pay the service to do ransomware attack. So it means that other than only create this ecosystem bigger, also for the law enforcer, they have to trace more detail when this attack happen. So ini sudah ada case juga di beberapa tempat di mana ketika didetailkan atau didalami, ketemunya tuh hanya pelakunya gitu. Padahal yang membayar kejahatan ini dan ransomware attack ini adalah orang yang punya pos untuk berbagai keperluan ya, untuk benar-benar mencuri data atau tapi mostly rata-rata untuk keperluan mendapatkan bayaran gitu ya. Dan yang menarik bahwa kadang-kadang action ini dilakukan oleh orang yang paham dulu gitu. Di suatu perusahaan ini ada datanya yang bagus ini tuh, atau ada data pentingnya ini tadi ya, critical business. Nah kalau itu di-attack, mau nggak mau perusahaan itu harus membayar. Gitu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So ransomware as a service is a real threat.
Definitely.
What's your view on ransomware as a service? How is it changing the landscape?
Yeah, so maybe tied in later the question that will come up. There's A players, B players, and C players in the threat landscape actively. think those are giving way for the C players to really, that are non-technical savvy, really to get that RAS, or the ransomware as a service, off the shelf and try to push it at any angle they can. And that might utilize also this, people talking about that there's insider threats in companies that are offered money to execute ransomware. So that gives way to, maybe if you don't know how to hack or attack a company, you can basically get people that use this angle, which is a big worry point for most companies, because if you have an insider and they get a pay cut from the ransom, it's very alluring in certain countries or contexts to get someone to play with their game. So
very ABC. The guy, I think, who did not change the default password, it was C for sure. Thank you. So, again, next question is to you, I think, which connects with this well. So what are the common threat actors that utilize ransomware in the current cybersecurity landscape?
Yeah, so going back to the model of A players, B players, and C players, if you think about an A player, those are the ones that get the limelight, the spotlight on them. And the reason why that is because they have a nice, beautiful web page that they put their victims on. So they will say, okay, this is a brand new victim, and we got the data, and please pay us ransom, or not, in the next coming days we're leaking more data. So those organizations, I would call them, they're basically like companies, and they have customer support. And if you go into their organizational structure, they have onboarders, trainers, they have multiple teams that have multiple specialists, including pen testers, escalation, like reverse escalation experts, malware reverse engineers, and open source intelligence gathering guys. So they all have separate teams with their own targets, and they all need to make money because it's a business, right? So these are highly mature. These are the A players of the environment. Then you go to the B players. These are people that have either built their own ransomware in certain shape or form, but they don't want to be so public. They're more low key, and they go maybe a little more targeted, and they have a smaller operation. And then you go to the C players, as I mentioned earlier. These people are generally more, try to use what's on the field, target it, and then try to get something done with a very limited amount of resources. So that, I would say, are the three major categories of players. The challenge with this always is that I know how complex all these threat actors behave in certain ways, and nobody has really the resources to go very deep into this in threat model analysis. So there's a lot of public resources available, and you can use the basics of a general threat model and map your defenses against that, as Indra mentioned earlier, to prevent this.
Great, thanks, Erwin. So I think in all of our experience, we see different types of vulnerabilities, different types of perhaps methods being used, different types of attacks from every organization, depending on your business types, depending on how critical data you have and how you're built in cloud native or not. We have different experiences. Right? And keeping that in mind, what are the common vulnerabilities in the attack surface that are taken advantage of when launching a ransomware attack? Starting with you, Park Edwin.
Yeah.
So what are the common vulnerabilities, I think, which you think can be utilized in your organization?
Yeah. So rather than only what we call it normal team or normal person that utilize these vulnerabilities, when these vulnerabilities issue spread up in forums or in discussion room, so any what we call it a newbie of this, they can also try to send let's say email phishing with ransomware inside. Just try to just try to and in some in company that many employees interact with this let's say email or task email or task. So they maybe do something click the emails or access the file, and they do something bad in their file storage. But in this time when file storage also synchronized with something important with company file storage, they can do something bad. Even for the first time, they do only for their personal things, but they can do something bad to organization or to company. That's why one of the key features to defend from this kind of habit is versioning, is file versioning. We do it in discipline, let's say in DevSecOps terminology to create application or to create web. One of the key features in DevSecOps things is versioning, file versioning. So that's one of our effort to try to defend from maybe some user habit when we access the file that maybe can make a big damage to the organization.
Well, I think we're going to reduce the surface attack surface, right? Partegu, what's your take? So it's not, maybe I said it wrongly before, it's not in your organization, obviously, you would want to do that. But common vulnerabilities in the attack surface that are taking advantage of and launching an ransomware attack.
Yes. From us perspective is if we see what the common vulnerability of surface that can be entry point of the ransomware, every aspect can be there. First one is that people, non-aware people, we know that people is the weakest chain and weakest link on the chains of the information security. So people is involved in it emotionally, can easily trust others. That's the one of the vulnerable thing that can be entry point of the ransomware. The second one is the technology also there, because we prefer to do the misconfiguration, default configuration, bulky system, something that never be maintained. We just trust first set, and we hope it will run smoothly. And the last thing is the process. The process, sometimes we always think that our process is always perfect, but the good process is something that monitor and always be reviewed. So I think, from my perspective, the common vulnerabilities, the first one is people, the second one is technology, the third one is process. All of these things can be the attack vector of the ransomware. So we have to be aware of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's that. So I would just go on the other common vulnerabilities that are, I guess, a little more, they're actually there and they're quite obvious. So when we think about ransomware, sometimes people just think of phishing email or some more of the things that you guys talked about. But in the startup space, there's a lot of usage of open source databases like Elasticsearch or MongoDB. And by default, they don't provide a lot of security just because historically the developers didn't really give a lot of attention to it. So there's a lot of people that just think, oh, I'm just going to deploy this database here. And well, it's publicly listing on the internet, and there's actually scripts going around constantly deploying ransomware everywhere. So they will get on your Elasticsearch database, either pull your entire data or delete it and hold it for ransom, or just try to encrypt it in some shape or form. So this is a very common or uncommon pattern, but it's so common that they have active scripts running it. So you just turn on the service and you just wait, and it will happen to you. So this is a little different kind of pattern.
Right. I think all in all the pattern you guys are talking about, getting into defense and depth, we look at every layer. It's not just one pattern. Partegu, what do you think? What are your views?
Okay, so looking at this situation, because condition, I'm trying to repeating what Partegu is actually saying, but the actual pillars. It's policies, okay, people, and the technology, right? So yes, just like we mentioned before, when we look on it, right? Technology is there, right? So people is sometimes we have a lot of people call like I normally call it very ignorant people, right? There's VIPs where they know what they're doing. They think they know what they're doing. So this is something that we need to keep educating people. That we need to let them know, let them understand what is actually the impact if you're doing this. Right? So education in terms of cybersecurity and multi-security source.
Awareness, education, culture, defense, and then I think covering all the basics. I think that leaves us with a good follow-up question. Jürgen, humans we talk about, right? So humans are the center of cybersecurity, the other targets, they are the solution. We're building everything, right? So for the companies defending against zero-day attacks, now you see these ransomwares, not all of them could be zero-day attacks, right? Zero days are taking issues for everything. That's what we're concerned, right? So zero-day attacks and ransomware, how can they create a superior and simplified security experience for their entire ecosystem? An ecosystem could be my customers, my vendors, right? My employees, from the endpoint to cloud, and make the human element part of the solution, logically simplifying everything.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting, complex question. What you're trying to do here probably is how do we find the balance between the functional use of technology, but also security with the user at the center of this. I hate to use the buzzword, but zero trust is something that is probably up that alley. So when I say zero trust, I'm talking about defense in depth on every layer and more intimate than we did previously. Not only like, oh, I have my Active Directory, I put a perimeter around it and that's it. No, we go on the user level. We do device-aware authentication, 2FA. These are things that are super intimate to the user itself. It's something you have with your phone to authenticate. So that kind of approach will definitely help. And also just moving away from this on-prem stuff that seems to be constantly the problem of, that keeps on continuing, that nobody knows where all their hardware is. And if you move that onto the cloud, and you have basically everything integrated with one single sign-on, all mostly SaaS services, things become very simple and very convenient because you just have one device, I log in everywhere, I get it, I have by default a lot of 2FA security, even if my password is stolen. And I think that's the pathway forward, using a cloud-centric, zero trust, in this case defense in depth, very intimately integrated among your entire tech stack. And that will be the most convenient for your users, will give you the most flexibility, and gives you also, in my opinion, still the most security, because doing it all yourself is just not workable in, well, we know how complex the topic is. So that would be probably my simplest answer to the complex question.
Yeah, very broad question. We logically ask you to make a strategy for us. Who's we can implement? So I think with your experiences, we have taught so many things which could be complex in people's minds. So from the audience's perspective, for the audience's benefit, if we have to leave them with a couple of takeaways, let's say, from this session, right? So what are the one or two most important things they should keep in mind when it comes to ransomware? Starting with you, Bhagavad.
Well, nowadays there's a lot of websites that we can access, right? So as a user, okay, even though we are not tech savvy, at least we know what we are doing when we accessing to the website, because we never know whether it is. We also need to be what we call it concerned, or we need to really know that the website that we are accessing is actually legitimate access. Okay, and not only that, we also need to ensure that, let's say we want to download something, some software, some application, we need to ensure we have to download from the legitimate website, not from any minor site. Okay. That actually what happened with one of my friends a couple weeks ago, basically. So he tried to download Microsoft Office, but from other sources, right? So what happened was that after he downloaded, he installed, and then all the content basically is become encrypted.
Basics again.
Yeah, exactly. It's again user.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bhagavad. Jürgen?
Yes, tie on the basics, right? That's mostly the message with any kind of conference you go to. Basics first. So to tie into that and build on top of that, I would think that the position of at GoTo we believe in GoTo Royal, we go together, we work together. And since we have seen so many challenges now in the cybersecurity threat landscape in Indonesia, info stealers that were so prevalent in the last year, MikroTik routers being abused for major DDoS attacks, and ransomware again being part of that mix, I think the major solution is just together, get connected, and share intelligence wherever possible. We did the next ransomware attack that might come, that will be maybe non-conventional. Help each other out, give the IOCs, be proactive. I know people don't want to admit they're a breach, but you can just give it without context, right? You can just say these are IOCs and don't ask me more about it, right? Try to work together. So that would be probably on top of the argument of the basics.
Thank you. One or two takeaways for us.
Okay, I think what I was already covered by and also Julian's, but I want to add more. One thing is that always expect something worse. Okay, in facing such kind of the cyber attack, like ransomware or malware or anything, so we have to prepare for the worst. Okay, and then from our perspective, so we always try if we have something that valuable data or we think that's the importance here, please always back up this one. So we never know. Kita nggak pernah tahu kapan zero days-nya datang, kapan attack-nya datang. Tapi kalau kita selalu berpikir bahwa kita backup datanya, even pada saat itu datang attack-nya dan kita nggak siap, kita selalu punya backup plan. We always have the backup plan, we have the backup data, and the other things that be disciplined. I mean, the weakest, just I said that the weakest thing in cybersecurity is people. See, when we trust, involved in emotionally to about some things, we always trust, and then this will be the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark Edwin, what's your view?
Yeah. Okay. So because a lot of speakers says about human factor, so we try to. I think we have to try to view this one from customer or user side, because sometimes security things is kind of like alien for for many person. So I read one book from Japan government. They try to inform security things by a very popular way. Maybe this is the simple way, but reach to the customer, trying to inform ransomware thing or ransomware attack by popular way. Because in this stage, we need to inform this kind of ransomware thing by a very simple way, so that many people will try to adopt the security culture, then can work together to prevent from ransomware attack. Thank you.
Right, I think we have covered the basics today. Defense and depth, security awareness, education, role of governments, institutions, right? Sharing data. So yeah, thank you very much for your thoughts. I think we have definitely gained something. Thank you very much.
Delegates will now have a brief question and answer session. Does anyone from the audience have any questions to give to our panelists or moderator? We are taking questions now. Any questions for the panelists? I'll count to 5. 1, 2, 3. Do you want to ask? No?
We were so good.